Audrey Gillhoolley was born on October 29, 1952 in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. During her childhood years, her mother worked in a shoe factory while her father worked for a grocery store. She had one brother named Roger. Mrs. Gillhoolley's family wasn't the richest but still had a good church background. For her, it was nice living in a small community out in the country. Once she became 12 years old, she got a little job selling flowers for a man who made artificial arrangements at Easter time, and then picked strawberries for the farmers in the summer. As Audrey Gillhoolley got older, she started working in a shirt factory in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. Towards the end of her high school years, she became interested in the military, especially after knowing the fact that a few of her uncles were already involved. After a visit to Washington, D.C. with her family in 11th grade, seeing a lady stand by the Washington Monument proudly in a uniform caught Mrs. Gillhoolley's attention. Also, a recruiter came to talk to students and helped influence her decision to join.
We had a recruiter come to our high school, and we had a couple different ones come, like one from the Navy, and I think there was one from the Air Force. And just listening to them, and actually the one guy kind of had me hook and sinker. He said that the military was one of the biggest welfare organizations of the world because you get free clothes and free food. And when he said free food, well, I was kind of there.
Instead of joining the Navy or another kind of branch, though, she got into the Women's Army Corps because the terminology was more familiar, and her uncle explained many experiences he had in the Army. First, Audrey Gillhoolley had to go through training camp. That was oftentimes classwork, drills, and cleaning.
You get a lot of classwork, then you get a lot of drill and ceremonies. You have cleaning and more cleaning and more cleaning to do. You spend hours a day doing that, and you just got to kind of constantly watch your back at that time because anytime you did anything wrong, the drill sergeants were right on you. So it was it was a fast couple weeks.
Every day, all the participants in the camp had to follow a routine. They woke up at about 5 o'clock in the morning, dressed into duty uniforms, cleaned the bathrooms, and had to make sure their living areas and lockers were organized. Next, everyone rushed into formation and marched to the mess hall for breakfast, which was 15 minutes long. After breakfast, inspection was conducted on uniforms with how correctly they were worn. So different courses were taken for 4 hours and lunch followed. Towards the second half of the day, physical training took place. Mrs. Gillhoolley mentioned that women only did calisthenics rather than today's heavy personal training. Once supper passed, the participants cleaned their area again and prepared uniforms for the next day. Uniforms got soaked with liquid starch to wash out tough stains or dirt. While floors were mopped, the uniforms were ironed for a while. By 9 o'clock, most of the work would finally get done. Despite the strict routines, Mrs. Gillhoolley adapted to these new responsibilities and jobs quite well.
I didn't have too much time, to think about it. I mean, you just sort of go right along with it. They have this way of training people that you kind of, most people I say, fall into it. And I was kind of lucky because I was brought up in a family where everything had to be clean for my mother. So, yeah, I didn't have any trouble with, keeping my area neat and that sort of thing.
In fact, she was assigned to the Clerical Training Center at Fort McClellan for 8 additional weeks to do specialized training. Audrey Gillhoolley's first official service began in the Presidio of San Francisco, which was also called Headquarters 6th U.S. Army at that time. She requested to work near a nice beach rather than the beach near Alaska. Then she got assigned over to Heidelberg, Germany. Over there, she worked on adjusting and keeping records for other soldiers and was held in charge of a team of people. Hundreds of insurance forms were also taken care of for soldiers. Mrs. Gillhoolley came back to the States, then to the military district of Washington, D.C., where she worked for the actual personnel office and took care of general officer records. In the PAU Pentagon, she did processes for all the Army personnel that came in and out of the district. Soon she decided to get off active duty with the regular army and transferred into the reserve units, such as in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. That was the 310th TACOM. Although Mrs. Gillhoolley did not mind serving in the reserves, she went back on duty for full time in Fort Belvoir.
So I was one of the first few people that they had brought in as a full-timer. They call those people AGR, Active Guard Reserve. So I stayed there, I guess I was in the D.C. area for almost 10 years, and then later got transferred up to the Willow Grove Naval Air Station, and I got assigned to the 79th ARCOM. Pretty much did the same kind of work there, except I was a personnel NCO for all of the AGRs that were assigned to the 79th ARCOM, and they had units all over Pennsylvania. So that was all of my assignments.
Audrey Gillhoolley stayed there until she would retire in 1993. Before her retirement, though, her service lasted through the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The crisis is when the Soviet Union and America experienced tension between each other once America found out the Soviets held many weapons secretly in Cuba. However, Mrs. Gillhoolley had no direct involvement in helping the Americans' cause during this event. People such as her were put on alert, though, in case an attack or some other emergency would occur. Next, when the Vietnam War happened in the later 1900s, Audrey Gillhoolley served in headquarters in Germany. The Germans did not really discuss much about the war because they were still disappointed over the effects of World War II and concentrated on that. As a result, Gillhoolley and her fellow workers were not influenced to a big degree by the Vietnam War when they were overseas.
During the Vietnam War, there was a conflict called Desert Storm that happened. Audrey Gillhoolley was a part of that with the Women's Army Corps during the Vietnam War. She worked with the Army Reserve in the 79th ARCOM. She was personnel NCO, so she was in charge of active guard soldiers. She also had to take a lot of field trips to different areas that they were assigned to go. Audrey Gillhoolley also had to make sure people had their emergency data cards up to date, and she had to make sure they had their panoramic x-rays. They would have to go over home mobilization packets to make sure the soldiers could get on a plane to travel to other places. They would have to make sure none of the soldiers had any dental problems, or they had to get them off of mobilization. Mrs. Gillhoolley and her team would receive hundreds of messages with the requirements that got the soldiers ready to get shipped off for mobilization. Mrs. Gillhoolley also had to go through many procedures to reach Master Sergeant level. She didn't have any Article 15s on her record or letters of reprimand. Also, she had to stay in weight requirements and get good grades on her duty assignments. The veteran also had to make sure her uniform was in excellent condition at all times. When she formed friendships with her fellow veterans, she thought they influenced her. She said that one always learns something from every person he or she would meet along the way, and there's always something that sticks with that person throughout the rest of your life. When being in the service, veterans normally form strong relationships with people they work with because they are always working together with them. Mrs. Gillhoolley would write letters to keep in touch with her family and friends back at home. She could use the phone, but she would have to drive so many miles just to get to the place that has a phone. Back then, they didn't have unlimited calling, so they would have to pay so much a minute if the call is long distance. When Mrs. Gillhoolley had spare time while she was in the service, she would do many things to keep her busy. She would get a couple of her friends and go to the rifle range to keep up with the weapons firing. She would shoot bow and arrow, go bicycling, hiking, and when she had the chance, she would go swimming. Her main recreation would be martial arts, though. She had many awards and certificates for being in martial arts. Mrs. Gillhoolley got awarded with 6 Good Conduct Medals for being a good soldier. If people had good qualifications, had a good record, and no bad records, they would be rewarded with the award. To qualify, one also had to be recommended by a sergeant. When Mrs. Gillhoolley finally came home and met with her family and friends, she was very happy to see them. She felt as though some people had forgotten who she was because she was gone for so long. Getting resettled into her home took a little while because she was so used to her life as a soldier during her service. Gillhoolley said it feels as though she was just coming into another place to live. A number of people that knew her years ago before her service have forgotten her when she came home, but this veteran's meritorious service is still worth acknowledging.
Master Sergeant Gillhoolley, thank you for your service.